بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So inshallah this is lesson number 8 from At-Tuhfah Al-Wasaabiyyah. Inshallah we'll continue with the tanbihat where we stopped off. We stopped on the At-Thalith. And he said قال المؤلف حفظه الله يكفي في الحكم على الكلمة بأنها اسم علامة واحدة. So it's enough that you see one of these alamat. Alright, you don't need to see all of them. So if you see al-khafd, that's enough. If you see the harf jar, dukhul al-harf jar is enough. If you see al, dukhul al alayhi, that's enough. Alright, any one of those alamat is sufficient. You don't need to see a bunch of them. But generally, you will see more than one, as is common in sentences, but one is sufficient. And he said, وَقَدْ تَجْتَمِعُ فِي الْإِسْمِ عَلَامَتَانِ أَوْ أَكْثَرَ نَحْوُ ذَهَبْتُ إِلَى الدَّرْسِ. So here we see ذَهَبْتُ إِلَى الدَّرْسِ. So here we have, first off, dukhul al-harf jar. Then we have al, and then we have al-khafd. So we have three alamat, all in the one word, just to show that it's ism. So he said, فَالدَّرْسِ اسم بدليل دخول حرف الجر عليه ودخول ال عليه ووجود الخفض في آخره فهذه ثلاث علامات. وكلما ازدادت العلامات ازداد يقين طالبي في الحكم على الكلمة بأنها اسم. So he said the more signs that you see that this is an ism, the more certain you become that this is an ism. But it's enough just to see one. Then he said الرابع عرفنا أنه قد يجتمع في الكلمة أكثر من علامة لكن هناك بعض العلامات لا يمكن أبدا أن تجتمع مع غيرها. So he said we will see that in one ism that maybe more than one alama, and you'll see more than one sign that this is an ism. But he says certain signs, they don't come to, like, you won't see certain ones together. You won't see certain ones together. Okay? For example, you're not going to see al with tanween. Alright? Because tanween is a alama of a alama to ism, right? And al, dukhul al is a alama to ism, right? So, but you can't say al baytun, right? So in this case, if you have al, you're not going to have tanween, right? And that's what he's talking about. He said عرفنا أنه قد يجتمع في الكلمة أكثر من علامة لكن هناك بعض العلامات لا يمكن أبدا أن تجتمع مع غيرها كالتنوين والألف واللام. تقول ركبت على فرس بالتنوين فإذا أدخلت عليه الألف واللام وقلت ركبت على الفرس حذفت التنوين. Alright, so just like we said, if you put the al on it, then you have to get rid of the tanween, so only one of those signs can be present, but you still have the khafd. Alright, الخامس علم من قولنا في بداية الدرس فمتى رأيت في الكلمة علامة من هذه العلامات أو كانت تقبلها حكمت عليها بأنها اسم أن الكلمة على قسمين. Okay, so he said this is going back to he said this is something that he mentioned at the beginning of this lesson and in his explanation, and he said فمتى رأيت, whenever you see a word في الكلمة علامة, you ever see a sign in one of these words من هذه العلامات أو كانت تقبلها, or it accepts it. Either one, you see it present, or two, it accepts it. So like for example al-bayt, you don't see tanween, but it accepts it, because you could take off the al and then you could say baytun, so it accepts it. And the same thing, al-baytu jamilun. Now here you don't see al-khafd, but I could say jittu min baytin jamilin. Alright, and now it accepts khafd, right? Or I can say jittu min al-bayti al-jamili. So here it accepts khafd, right? أو كانت تقبلها حكمت عليها بأنها اسم. So either one, you see the sign, or two, it accepts the sign, but the sign is not present. Then you say that it's an ism, alright? So we say أن الكلمة على قسمين. So the الكلمة, the word is in two categories. قسم وجد فيه علامة الاسم. So we have one category that you find the sign of a ism, and you find the علامة الاسم. كزيد من قولك هذا زيد, فهذا القسم تقول فيه زيد اسم لوجود علامة الاسم فيه وهي تنوين في آخره وهذا القسم هو الأكثر. So this one is the one that you actually see the sign. You see it. Alright, so that, and he said وهذا القسم هو الأكثر, and this is the category, this category is the majority. The majority you're going to see a sign. وقسم لا يوجد فيه علامة الاسم ولكن يقبلها نحو كلمة هذا من المثال المتقدم فإنها لا يوجد فيها أي علامة من علامات الاسم السابقة فهذا القسم تقول فيه كلمة هذا اسم لأنها تقبل علامة من علامة الاسم وهي دخول حرف من حروف الجر كقولك سلمت على هذا. So like for example we say هذا كتابي. هذا كتابي. Here there's no علامة الاسم. None. Zero. There's nothing. There's no tanween. There's no دخول al. There's no. So but now how does it accept it? Will it accept it? Yes. Yes it will, because you could say like for example جئت بهذا, but I'm referring to the book, right? جئت بهذا. So here we have the دخول حرف جار عليه, right? So because of it accepts a harf jar, if we put the harf jar with it, it would accept it and it would be correct. Then that shows that this is an ism. All right, it's an ism. All right, it's not a harf, it's not a fi'l, it's an ism. So salamtu ala hada. Salamtu ala hada. So here, because of the dukhul al-harf jar, which is ala, it shows that this is an ism. All right, and the asila here, inshallah, this is something that you can do on your own to test yourself. And try to answer these questions. Like for example, like you have some questions that come out of the matan and some questions that come out of the sharh. So try to answer them to the best of your capability. So like for example, ma hiya alamat al-ism, obviously that comes from the matan. All right, that comes from the matan. Ma hiya al-khafd lughatan wa istilahan, that would be from the sharh. So all of these ta'rifat, these definitions, you should be writing them down in a notebook. You should be writing them down in a notebook and you should be memorizing them. All right. So when it, like for example, in the first lesson we took the ta'rif al-kalam, and where the sahib al-matan said al-kalamu huwa al-lafdhu al-murakkabu al-mufidu bil-wad'. So here al-lafdhu, what is it in the Arabic language? We talked about that. It means taraha or rama. All right, what is it in the istilah al-nahwiyin? صوت مشتمل على بعض الحروف الهجائية التي تبتدئ بالألف وتنتهي بالياء. All right, like that. I'm giving you the ta'rif out of Tuhfah Saniyah, not Tuhfah Al-Wasaabiyyah. So if you memorize from this, your ta'rif is going to be a little bit mukhtasar. All right, so but you should be memorizing that. All right, you should be memorizing that. So the same thing with when he goes over the ism. What is the ism in the lugha? What is the ism in the istilah in the istilah al-nahwiyin? And write this in a notebook and memorize this. All this should be memorized. Okay, you should not go to the next book until you memorize everything that you have to memorize. See, and that's why I tell the people, first you should memorize the matan. The matan should be memorized before you even study the book. All right, if that's something that's mandatory, because obviously something like Umdat al-Ahkam, if the person is memorizing Bulugh al-Maram, and then while he's memorizing Bulugh al-Maram and he goes and studies Umdat al-Ahkam just to get an understanding of fiqh before he goes into but he's memorizing Bulugh al-Maram, then in that case, you won't have to memorize Umdat al-Ahkam. But if this is something like this where you're memorizing the actual matan, like al-Ajrumiyyah, you have to memorize it. You have to. I mean, it's like there's no getting away from that. Anybody that's done anything in Nahu, they've all started with the memorization of Al-Ajrumiyyah. I don't know of anybody that didn't sit down and memorize it. What you memorize after that is your business. Some people, okay, to be fair, some people didn't memorize Al-Ajrumiyyah, but they memorized Mulhat al-I'rab. But the point is that you have to memorize something. You have to memorize a matan in the beginning of Nahu, whatever it is. All right, you're not just going to jump up and just start memorizing Alfiyat ibn Malik. Unless maybe you had a very, very good teacher of Nahu as you were growing up and you really had a strong understanding, then maybe you might fall in that category, but you still have to memorize Alfiyah. But in the beginning, for the average person, he's gonna have to memorize either Al-Ajrumiyyah or he's gonna have to memorize Mulhat al-I'rab in the beginning. Obviously, Ajrumiyyah is better because of it's just being easier to understand. Everything's laid out for you. Mulhat is a little bit easier because it's a poem. So especially the Arabs, they find that a lot easier because it has a rhythm. It's a very, very well written poem by Al-Hariri, and it's a very early. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, it might even be the first matan that was written for Nahu, the matan, because other people compile books like Sibawayh, he compiled Al-Kitab, and people compile books, but this was like the actual matan as far as a small matan. Hariri, he kind of he beat everybody to that with Mulha, and it's a very good matan. The people should study it even if they don't memorize it, and read the different shuruh. But if you know, as far as like what you're gonna memorize, you either memorize Al-Ajrumiyyah or you memorize Mulhat al-I'rab in the beginning. But you have to memorize one. If you memorize, and obviously I advise Ajrumiyyah, you memorize it first, and then you go in and you study the metin. You just study the metin itself if you can. If you can't, like here, you know, you only find somebody that's explaining the sharh, then you can go in and study that. It's fine, but it's better to go through the metin first, just to get an understanding of the metin itself. Then when you go into the sharh, now your focus is on memorizing everything in the sharh that you need to understand the metin better. Alright, so you're going to take all the ta'rifat and all this stuff, and it's better that you read these books before the class. You know, you don't go into like At-Tuhfah Al-Wasaabiyyah or At-Tuhfah Al-Saniyah or any of these books and you haven't read the book first. Read the book first, get familiar with it, and know, and then you already start writing this stuff out in a notebook before you even go to the class. You know, in fact, you should be reading along as you're memorizing in the first place. Because as you're memorizing, you want to understand what you're memorizing so you can read along with the sharh as you're doing that. So you just take one sharh and you memorize from it. Back in the days when I was studying, we only had two choices. We had Al-Kafarawi and we had At-Tuhfah Al-Saniyah. Now, I mean, we had other choices, but I mean, these were the two that were available. And of course, At-Tuhfah Al-Saniyah was the most available. This book, Tuhfat Al-Wasaabiyyah, it might have been written at the time, but it wasn't published at the time when I was in Damaj. I was in Damaj with Sheikh Ahmed bin Thabit. But at that time, like I said, I wouldn't say that he didn't write it. He might have already written it, but it wasn't published at the time. You know, because the original publishing, I think, was in it says here, I think 2009 or something. So that's, yeah. All right, I was in Damaj from 2000 to 2004, from the end of 2000 to the end of 2004. So at that time, this book hadn't been published. You know, so all we had, I mean, what everybody studied, they studied At-Tuhfah Al-Saniyah. That was the first book that everybody studied. And then after that, it was up to whoever you studied with. But everybody memorized Al-Ajrumiyyah, and everybody took the ta'rifat out of At-Tuhfah Al-Saniyah, and they memorized that. And that's what you got to do. You have to do that in the beginning. Don't be lazy. And also, like I said, read the book before you study it. You know, don't go into the book and you're not familiar with it, because you don't want to study any book where it's like new to you. You know, as you're going along, like, wow, okay, I didn't know that. Wow, this is new. It shouldn't be new, because you should have already gone through this on your own. So now what you're trying to do is you're focusing on the things that you don't understand. And this way you can ask the questions that you need to ask the teacher so you can understand what you need to understand. Allahu musta'an. So this is why you need to focus on, memorizing the metin first, reading through the sharh, taking out the ta'rifat and the things that you see as important, and start, once you memorize the metin, you get started on memorizing those ta'rifat, and then you go into the explanation with the teacher, and alhamdulillah, you're one of the students that's raising his hand all the time, that's trying to answer all the questions. The one when nobody can answer, the teacher calls on you, to answer, to put everybody to shame. So that's the type of student you want to be. You don't want to be that student with that dull look on his face the whole time, trying to figure out. Then he's got to go get with his friends and waste a whole bunch of extra time trying to understand a lesson that he should have understood in the first place. So you got to take your studies seriously. When you study, you come prepared. You go to a class, you go prepared. You won't go into a battle not knowing your enemy and not knowing what you're undertaking. Just like say, okay, we're going to wing it from here. You're going to wing yourself right to the graveyard. So the point is like, that's not how you win battles, and that's not, and studying is a battle. It's a battle. You go in prepared. That book, it's either that book is going to defeat you or you're going to defeat the book. The only way that you can defeat the book is you got to know your enemy. You got to have very, very, very good familiarity with who you're up against. And if you go into that book and you're not familiar with it, that book's going to defeat you. And that's why you see people sit down and they study Tuhfat Al-Saniyah 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, and they can't understand it. It's not that he's studying it over and over and over again. Like, for example, Sheikh Muqbil, rahimahullah, he studied Qatar al-Nida, I think about 7 times. But he didn't study it 7 times because he didn't understand it. He understood it. He studied it 7 times because he was forced to go into a school with the Shia, and he didn't want to study anything else with them. So every time he would act like he didn't understand it to make them repeat the lesson again. So he'd keep going through Qatar instead of studying their other books, which was just, all their books are just batil. So he wanted to study that, but he had already understood it, and that's why when he went to Mecca and he was in Medina, that's why he was the one helping all the students with Nahu. So I mean, I'm not talking about that type of person. I'm talking about the actual person who studies 6 or 7 times because they can't get it. They can't get it because they're not going and they're not doing it right. That enemy's defeating them. That book is defeating them because they're not doing it right. You memorize the metin, you go through the sharh, you read through the sharh, you understand it, you get the ta'rifat. If you're studying Tuhfah al-Saniyah, then you need to be focused on reading Tuhfah al-Saniyah. You don't need to be reading the sharh of Shaykh Uthaymeen. You don't need to be reading the sharh of Ahmed bin Thabit. You don't need to be reading the sharh of Al-Fakihi. You don't need to be reading the sharh of Al-Kafarawi. If your focus is on you trying to get Tuhfah al-Saniyah, that's what you need to be focused on, getting the ta'rifat and understanding. Now, once you've studied Tuhfah al-Saniyah and you've understood it, now you can read these other shuruh. You can read the sharh of Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen. You can read the sharh of Al-Faqihi, of Al-Kafrawi. Read them. Once you've understood, just to get some extra fawaid that you can add to what you already have. Other than that, no. Focus on the book that you're focusing on. Go to the lesson prepared. Go to the lesson prepared. Like I said, don't go there with that duh expression on your face. Alright, so now we're going to start the next lesson, alamat al-fi'l. So now we're going to go over the signs that you know that this is a fi'l. قال والفعل يعرف بقد والسين وسوف وتاء تأنيث الساكنة. So the fi'l is known by what? بقد, بدخول القد. And we're going to go over this, والسين وسوف وتاء تأنيث الساكنة. Alright, so أقول يتميز الفعل عن أخويه الاسم والحرف بعلامات كثيرة. ذكر المصنف منها أربع. So here there's a lot of different signs to show the differentiate between fi'l wa ism wal harf, to show that this is a fi'l and not an ism and a harf. And here he mentioned 4. Okay, الأولى قد, والثانية السين, الثالثة سوف, الرابعة تاء تأنيث الساكنة. وهذه العلامات منها ما يكون في أول الكلمة كقد والسين وسوف. So he said it's from amongst these signs is some that are in the beginning of the word, like قد والسين وسوف. قد comes before the word, سين وسوف. Sin is attached to the beginning of the word, and sofa also comes at the beginning before the beginning of the word. ومنها ما يكون في آخر الكلمة, and of course we have the one that goes at the end of the fi'l, which is a تاء تأنيث الساكنة. فمتى رأيت في الكلمة علامة من هذه العلامات أو كانت تقبلها حكمت عليها بأنها فعل. And it's the same thing. Whenever you see any one of these alamat, or any one of them or more than one, you might see because you might see 2, like for example, قد ذهبت فاطمة إلى السوق. So here we have قد ذهبت, and then we have تأنيث الساكنة فاطمة إلى السوق. Alright, so in this case you see 2 alama. So you can see 1 or you can see 2. It's rare, but I mean, like for example, you're not going to see قد سوف يذهب. So like obviously like that type of thing you're not going to see it, but you see like قد with the تأنيث الساكنة maybe. Alright, so he said whenever you see one of these signs, or it accepts that sign. Like for example, if you say ذهب أحمد إلى سوق. So here we don't have the sign of قد, we don't have sin, we don't have sofa, and we don't have تأنيث الساكنة. But we can say ذهب أحمد, and we can say ذهبت زينب, or ذهبت فاطمة, or ذهبت أسماء. Alright, so any of these names you see, from the feminine names, that you can add تأنيث الساكنة, right? Or you could say like يذهب أحمد, you would say سيذهب أحمد, سوف يذهب أحمد, or you could just say, go back to ذهب أحمد, you could just say قد ذهب أحمد. Alright, قد ذهب أحمد. So even if it doesn't have the sign but it accepts it, then you say it's a fi'l. فأما قد فإنها علامة تدخل على الماضي والمضارع. So this the قد, it goes on the fi'l الماضي والمضارع. And this is the one that's mushtarak. Mushtarak, it means that it goes on the madi wal mudari. Because some of them, you see some signs they're mushtarak, and some signs they only go with the mudari, and some signs only go with the madi. So here he gives you qad, which is the mushtarak, which is between the madi and the mudari. Sin wa sofa, which go on the mudari, and ta'nith sakina, which go on the madi. So he gives you, like, that's why he mentioned these 4, to give you all the main signs. So he said فأما قال فإنها علامة تدخل على الماضي والمضارع فإن دخلت على الماضي دلت على أحد المعنيين. So if it goes on the ماضي, then it shows one of 2 meanings. أحدهما التحقيق. This means that like this happened for sure. أي تحقيق وقوع الفعل. To show that this event happened for sure. نحو قد سافر علي. So there's no doubt that Ali's traveled. سافر قد سافر علي. Because if I just say سافر علي, the person will say, أنت متأكد? You sure? But if you say قد سافر علي, then خلاص, he's not going to ask you that because you use the word قد, which shows تحقيق. Now obviously this is an Arabic language, which the majority of people won't understand that today. They'll probably still ask you. وقوله تعالى قد أفلح المؤمنون. قد أفلح المؤمنون. Alright, so أفلح is successful. Alright, the mu'minun are the successful ones. فقد حرف تحقيق. وكل من سافر وأفلح فعل ماض بدليل دخول قد عليه. والمعنى تحقق سفر علي وفلاح المؤمنين. Alright, so this means that this happened for sure and there's no doubt. الثاني التقريب. So this is the second meaning, which means تقريب, which means that this is close to happening. It hasn't happened yet, but it's close to happening. Alright, so he said that تقريب أي تقريب وقوع الفعل. It means that it shows that this is close to happening. نحو قد قامت الصلاة. So obviously when the مقيم الصلاة, when he says قد قامت الصلاة, ما قامت الصلاة, because in the إقامة الصلاة, it starts with the تكبيرة الإحرام, and of course the imam hasn't ما كبر. So in this case it hasn't happened, but it's close to happening. So he's calling the people to show that this is close to happening, so to line up and prepare for it. وقد فقد حرف تقريب وقام فعل ماض بدليل دخول قد عليهم. والمعنى قرب وقت قيامها. قرب وقت قيامها. It means it's close. And the same thing you could say قد غربت الشمس. قد غربت الشمس, but the shams is still it's like right on the horizon, about to go over. And just to show that it's but this is obviously to show you wouldn't do this in Ramadan, because then the person would understand that you meant tahqiq and maybe they do iftar, but you're saying that it's close to going down. Alright, when دخلت على المضارع دلت على أحد المعنيين أيضا. So this is the ماضي. The ماضي تحقيق وتقريب. That's the two meanings. Now with the مضارع, it's going to have two other meanings, alright, which is going to be a taqlil wa takthir. Taqlil wa takthir. So let's go over these now, inshallah. أحدهما التقليل أي تقليل وقوع الفعل. And this shows that this happens rarely. That this rarely happens. نحو قد ينجح القصول. So obviously here ينجح, it means to be successful. الكسول is a صيغة المبالغة from كسلان, كسل. And you know كسل, it means obviously to be lazy. So lazy people are not successful. ولكن قد يحصل قد ينجح القصول, you know, قد يحصل, you know, but it's rare and you shouldn't bank on it. You know, don't think that you're going to be that one lazy person that's successful. No, okay, so this is very, very rare. قد ينجح القصول وقد يجود البخيل. يجود البخيل, that means that the bakhil is like very generous with his money. It's very, very, very rare. وقد يجود البخيل قد يحصل. All right, it could happen, but like again, you wouldn't bank on it. All right. فقد حرف تقليل وكل من ينجح ويجود فعل مضارع بدليل دخول قد عليه. والمعنى يقل نجاح القصول وجود البخيل. So all these two things, they rarely happen. That a lazy person, a very lazy person, is successful, and a stingy person is very generous. الثاني التكثير, and this is not a common. The more common one is a taqlil. A takthir, it means that this happens a lot, and you'll understand the difference based on the context, because you could flip these two sentences. قد يفشل الكسول, قد يفشه الكسول, يفشل الكسول, and it's takthir, because we know that the kasul a lot fashala, it means to fail, to be a failure. And of course we know that the lazy people, most of the time they fail. So and قد يبخل البخيل, قد يبخل البخيل. All right, so I mean this would be takthir. All right, if you just flip those examples. So he said الثاني التكثير أي تكثير وقوع الفعل نحو قد ينجح المجتهد وقد يجود الكريم. So he said قد ينجح المجتهد. All right, so of course the person who works hard, a lot of the times they're successful. They're successful. It might take them time. You know, it takes more than just hard work. Obviously, it's hard work and persistence. But the hard work is definitely there, because the lazy person, he can't be persistent. All right, وَقَدْ يَجُودُ الْكَرِيمُ. All right, so of course the Karimu is a generous person. He's Kareem. You know, he honors his guests. He honors the people around him. So He's more, yeah, like to act like in a very generous manner. Yes. فقال حرف تكثير وكل من ينجح ويجود فعل مضارع بدليل دخول قد عليه والمعنى يكثر نجاح المجتهد وجود الكريم. This happens a lot. This shows that this happens a lot. And then he said تنبيه قد يدخل حرف قد على الفعل المضارع فيفيد تحقيق. So he's saying it could also, like قد can also go on the فعل المضارع and it can have the meaning of a تحقيق, because we know that تحقيق is for the فعل الماضي and it's not for the mudari', but there are examples where qad entered onto the fi'l mudari' and it had the meaning of a tahqiq, and he's going to give you the example from the Quran right now. He said على الفعل المضارع فيفيد تحقيق نحو قوله تعالى وقد نرى تقلب وجهك في السماء. قد نرى, يعني this is محقق. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saw, تقلب وجهك في السماء. Alright. And this ayat was sent down because the Prophet ﷺ, when they were in Mecca, he used to, when they prayed, they would face Bayt al-Maqdis, but he would make the Kaaba between him and Bayt al-Maqdis, so he's facing the Kaaba. But when they were ordered with Hijrah to Medina, he was still facing Bayt al-Maqdis, so he couldn't face the Kaaba, and he was making dua, and because he wanted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he wanted the Qibla to be the Qibla of Ibrahim, which is the Kaaba. And this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling him قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ. And then of course after that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, he said قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا. So we're gonna make you face the qibla that you were pleased with, the one that you wanted. And then this is so qad here, it means a tahqiq. قَدْ نَرَى تقلب وجهك في السماء. فقد في هذه الآية ونحوها حرف تحقيق ونرى فعل مضارع والمعنى تحققت رؤيتنا تقلب وجهك. Alright, so this is قد, and inshallah we're going to stop here for today, and then the next lesson inshallah we'll go over sin وسوف and maybe and hopefully تأنيث ساكنة inshallah ta'ala. وإلى هنا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.